and they changed it.
And who do you see on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader. Okay? But this is the thing the Republican Party has to understand too. Both parties lost in the last election. Trump won, okay? And I don't know if that's going to transfer. We should have won 4 more seats in the Senate. If you looked at the last 70 races for the Senate, 69 follow exactly the
I think it's Moore versus Youngkin. That's where I see it.
Youngkin would be.
Youngkin
it's
is
going to go back to
adjacent, and then Vance and Jr. will fight it out for that crowd.
You're AOC and Bernie, and who's at the top of the ticket?
They're going to lead right now.
Who's at the top of that ticket, Kevin? Because if it's not Bernie, he's going to be vice president and then wait his turn?
No, it would be. Bernie's been running each time. I'm just saying who's in the lead right now. I don't think that's how it ends up.
But big crowds don't necessarily mean who's the right candidate. You know, when I started...
No, but it drives where the ideas are going to go. It's going to drive the money for a while.
Just a few days ago, I dropped part 1 of Bill Maher ripping into AOC over her anti-American comments. But what you didn't know is that part 2 was already brewing, sharper, bolder, and now it's finally here, ready to stir things up. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video that brings the heat.
They changed it.
And who do you see on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader. Okay? But this is the thing the Republican Party has to understand too. Both parties lost in the last election. Trump won, okay? And I don't know if that's going to transfer. We should have won 4 more seats in the Senate. If you looked at the last 70 races for the Senate, 69 follow exactly the
I think it's Moore versus Youngkin. That's where I see it.
Youngkin would be.
Youngkin
it's
is
going to go back to
adjacent, and then Vance and Jr. will fight it out for that crowd.
But you're AOC and Bernie, and who's at the top of the ticket?
They're going to lead right now.
Who's at the top of that ticket, Kevin? Because if it's not Bernie, he's going to be vice president and then wait his turn?
No, it would be. Bernie's been running each time. I'm just saying who's in the lead right now. I don't think that's how it ends up.
But big crowds don't necessarily mean who's the right candidate. You know, when I started...
No, but it drives where the ideas are going to go. It's going to drive the money for a while.
It doesn't make them the winner.
Right from the start, Bill Maher shuts down the idea of a Bernie Sanders AOC ticket, comparing it to the doomed Harris-Warren experiment. But things heat up fast. Kevin McCarthy jumps in, urging Maher to consider that Sanders and AOC could represent the future of the Democratic Party. Maher doesn't budge. He stands firm and then drops a bombshell, a reason so raw and unapologetically honest, it could send shockwaves straight through the core of the DNC.
You'll have to wait till you'll get 2 years out, and then you'll start seeing these governors that start showing solutions. You also have to know, what is the issue going to be? Are we going to have a foreign policy issue? Are we going to have an economic issue? And who's been the best in leading in that? But right now, for the Democrats, who's going to lead for the next 2 years? The money is going to... AOC outraised everybody in the House.
And it's all small donors.
It's all small donors.
Yeah.
And this is exactly where Trump was, when no one gave him a chance at 17. He outraised everybody else. So that's where the base is at, right? And so what will happen, it'll move after the next midterm elections.
Before we roll the Bill Maher clip, I need to address a ridiculous comparison that keeps making the rounds, comparing Donald Trump to AOC. Let's set the record straight. Yes, Trump drew in a wave of small-dollar donors, but that's not what made his movement powerful. Voters didn't rally behind him because he checked off some ideological boxes. They backed him because of his bold, unapologetic, America First policies. Trump stood as a firewall against the radical agenda the DNC, under the likes of Kamala Harris, was ready to unleash. Open borders, out-of-control spending, and a full-on assault on traditional values. He was the antidote to all of that. Trying to draw a parallel between Trump and AOC only proves how out of touch the left is with the motivations of everyday voters. Trump represented a populist movement built on strength and conviction. AOC? She's a loud voice, but one with very little substance behind it. Now let's get to Bill Maher's blunt and brutally honest reason for doubting the viability of an AOC Sanders ticket.
What do you think of the fact that the people who are getting the big crowds right now are AOC and Bernie Sanders? They're going around the country. Thank you, there's that same guy. I call him the always wrong guy. Okay, but I feel like, big crowds, again, the shiny object that the Democrats chase. It's not about the big crowds that come out to you when you're talking in a festival or wherever they are. I think it's because I think Bernie showed up at Coachella. That must have been fun for the fans. It's who shows up on Election Day. And I just don't see that's the ticket. I mean, Cory Booker, I know you've worked with him. I like Cory a lot from my home state of New Jersey. Made a speech for 25 hours. Again, just whacking each other off. This is just not what's going to get the job done.
Maher comes in sharp, direct, with zero sugarcoating. Sure, AOC and Bernie Sanders are drawing big crowds and riding waves of energy and applause, but we've seen this show before. Just last year, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were riding high too. They had the crowds, the media fawning over them, and half of Hollywood, icons like Beyoncé and Taylor Swift, cheering them on like the election was already in the bag. With that kind of star power and media hype, if you'd told anyone the Democrats would lose the popular vote, it would have seemed laughable. On paper, they looked untouchable. But when the votes were counted, reality hit hard. The Democrats got stomped. Maher's warning? It's déjà vu. The left is once again mistaking hype for momentum, noise for substance. And that kind of miscalculation could be disastrous. But what Maher says next? It's a truth bomb so jarring it could leave Democrats reeling.
The Democratic Party should put the people out there who the people want. They should put the politicians out there who the people want, who they're asking for, who are meeting the moment with the same energy that
they're not asking for AOC.
Yes, they are.
The people you party with
No. The people I party with don't like AOC.
Oh, please.
No, they don't at all.
Well, most people don't.
But
she's
AOC,
very far left.
Let me tell you why I'm saying that. Because because people will vote for AOC and Donald Trump on the same ticket. Because they're authentic. No, because they're authentic.
I don't think Don.
I think you're wrong about that.
What people like about people like Trump and Fetterman is because it's irrelevant to her life.
But you don't know her life.
I know that being a gorgeous woman who I wouldn't even know was Hispanic in a city that has 1 million Hispanics and does not treat them badly.
But that doesn't mean she doesn't struggle. That doesn't mean that she was set down.
It implies it.
Bill Maher doesn't pull any punches when it comes to AOC. And in his view, her biggest problem is authenticity, or the lack of it. He argues that AOC fails to connect with everyday Americans because she often comes across as performative, not genuine. For years, she's leaned into a subtle victim narrative, implying that her background and ethnicity have made her the target of systemic oppression. But Maher isn't buying it. In this clip, he pushes back hard, challenging that carefully constructed storyline. He points out that in a place like New York City, a cultural melting pot and one of the most progressive cities in the country, South, American immigrants simply aren't treated the way AOC suggests. Maher argues that her version of events feels more like political theater than lived experience, a narrative crafted to score viral points on social media rather than reflect reality. And that disconnect, he says, is exactly why AOC's message might fire up activist circles but falls flat with the broader American public. But Maher doesn't stop there. He goes even deeper, calling out what he sees as AOC's carefully manufactured persona. Watch this.
But that doesn't mean that she was set down in a Hispanic ghetto in the Bronx and had to deal with that growing up, and that she's come from a working class family.
It implies that it implies that in some way she's behind the 8 ball because of that, and it's just not true. And so
I don't know if she's behind the 8 ball, but I don't think she's as privileged as many people who are in Congress right now.
Is that privileged or not? She was a bartender.
Yeah.
So I was a delivery boy.
But I'm saying sometimes, Bill, you don't agree with Donald Trump's policies.
No.
But that's what the people want.
Some of them.
Whether you like her or not, I don't like what she did with Amazon in New York, but I think AOC she's a Democratic icon.
Wait, did Don Lemon actually call AOC an icon of the Democratic Party? That says a lot. No wonder the DNC is barreling toward political irrelevance. When your idea of leadership is someone who thrives on social media outrage, rehearsed victimhood, and performative politics, it's clear the bench is shallow. The problem isn't just a lack of new ideas. The Democrats are starving for genuine, intelligent voices who can connect with voters outside their progressive echo chamber. But let's not get sidetracked. That wasn't even Maher's main point in the clip we just watched. What he really did was take a sledgehammer to AOC's carefully crafted backstory of rising from hardship. He calls out the inconsistencies, the glossy political packaging, and the myth she sold to the public. According to Maher, AOC didn't battle her way up from the bottom. She was handpicked and groomed by a movement that values optics over authenticity. And that, he argues, is exactly why her message may light up Twitter, but falls flat with everyday Americans who are tuning out in growing numbers.
You think that's the direction the country, the Democratic
I'm not saying the policies that she espouses, that's the direction, but I'm saying that you have to give the people who are out front speaking for the party, not the people who are.
If you think
she's evolving,
yeah, she's evolving,
and
as we all are,
and she is moving into
right.
She understands the game a little bit more, and if you notice, she is sort of becoming a sort of normal kind of Democrat in many ways.
Yes.
I think she's evolving.
Okay, great.
She's a very smart tactic. She's very smart.
Let's get behind that.
Bill Maher is doing what most in the mainstream media won't, forcing Don Lemon to acknowledge some hard truths about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In a rare moment of candor, even Lemon concedes that AOC isn't exactly beloved by the American public. Not because of some grand right-wing smear campaign, but because of her polarizing personality and far-left policies. Maher doesn't let up. He points out that while AOC may dominate headlines and light up social media, that kind of buzz doesn't equal real national appeal. The reality, he argues, is that she's simply too far left, too deeply embedded in the language of wokeness, to ever unify a broad Democratic coalition. And Maher's warning is crystal clear. If the Democratic Party keeps elevating AOC as a leading figure, they're not just risking more internal fractures, they're practically handing Republicans a win in 2028. In fact, he suggests that putting AOC at the top of the ticket could be the final nail in the coffin for a party already struggling to connect with working-class voters. Even Joe Rogan isn't sold on the idea of an AOC ticket. Take a look at this.
One of my favorite interviews was when AOC was talking to that lady and she asked her to expand.
About Israel-Palestine?
Oh my God.
Well, I believe absolutely in Israel's right to exist.
She just collapsed into herself?
It's literally like a fifth grader that didn't study.
Looked at that incident more through just as an incident.
And then they ask you about the subject, or you didn't read the book. Well, you know, it's about Billy and his dog.
What people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is...
But the crazy thing about that interview is that so her first comment comes off with like total authority.
I am a proponent of a two-state solution.
One little follow-up question. The question's like, well, what do you mean by that? And then you just see her get weaker and weaker.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
But what do you mean about that? And she's like, I don't know what I'm talking about, man.
Yeah.
And she literally goes, I'm really not the expert.
Do you think you can expand on that? I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
She just gave up.
What's even more revealing than AOC's blatant hypocrisy is just how often she comes across as uninformed and intellectually shallow, despite her efforts to appear otherwise. She tends to enter interviews with a polished confidence, acting as though she has all the answers to the world's problems. But once you scratch beneath the surface, that illusion falls apart quickly. In a recent interview, she opened with bold declarations and sweeping progressive talking points, using buzzwords to steer the conversation. But the moment she was asked for specifics, real policy details, data, or clear solutions, she faltered. No substance, no clarity, just vague deflections and half-formed responses. It became painfully clear. The emperor has no clothes. AOC isn't the thought leader she's been sold as. She's a brand, not a brain. And as Bill Maher and others are starting to highlight, that's exactly why she may be more of a liability than an asset for a Democratic Party already struggling to win over middle America.
Another one who's doing that, Gavin Newsom, who I've always been a fan of and thought always could and should be president. And then I recently had a conversation with somebody and I said, gosh, I've always been hoping Gavin would move toward the center and it doesn't seem to be happening. And then, as if I had just manifested it, I see this headline somebody sent me a few days ago. Gavin Newsom name-checked me.
Yeah.
In how much he wanted to, or how he wanted to move.
Because he's starting a podcast.
Yes.
What
And
he wants to talk to dissenting
everybody.
voices. Yeah.
So I'm like, thank you, Jesus.
Bill Maher's top pick to lead the Democrats into the future? California Governor Gavin Newsom. Maher argues that Newsom has the Polish experience and political savvy that AOC clearly lacks. And sure, on paper, Newsom might appear to be the more viable leader. But here's where I part ways with Bill, because Gavin Newsom is as slick and slippery as they come. Just take a look at his record. During the devastating wildfires that ravaged California, Newsom's response was slow and reactive, leaving countless communities to fend for themselves. Under his leadership, the homelessness crisis has spiraled out of control, turning cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles into cautionary tales of failed urban policy. And then there's the infamous French Laundry incident, Newsom dining. Maskless with lobbyists at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the state, all while everyday Californians were under strict lockdowns. Political acumen? Maybe. But leadership grounded in integrity and accountability? Not even close.
Here is the dilemma for Democrats. Their young people, their key constituency, not only don't like their own civilization, they like the wrong one. They actually think Hamas is a liberation movement. They chant for the Houthis. They're chanting, "We will honor our martyrs" at Yale. They're looking for love in all the wrong countries. At an AOC Bernie Sanders rally in Idaho last month, someone threw a Palestinian flag over an American flag, and the crowd erupted in approval. What should have happened after that is one of the adults on stage should have told their young, loyal followers, this is not a symbol of freedom. This is.
In the end, Bill Maher delivers a harsh but much-needed reality check, not just on AOC but on the Democratic Party as a whole. He calls out the party's dangerous obsession with image over substance, performance over policy. Yes, AOC draws crowds and headlines, but her lack of depth, over-reliance on identity politics, and inability to connect beyond the progressive echo chamber are serious liabilities. Even Don Lemon, one of her longtime defenders, is forced to admit she's more polarizing than popular. Maher's warning is clear. If Democrats keep elevating figures like AOC, they're setting themselves up for another painful defeat in 2028. And while Gavin Newsom might seem like a more polished alternative, his record of mismanagement and political theater doesn't exactly inspire confidence either. At this rate, the party isn't just struggling to find real leadership, it's teetering on the edge of losing touch with reality. And voters, they're starting to notice. That wraps up today's video. If you appreciated the breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content that cuts through the noise.